The salt air carried laughter that evening, drifting across the deck of the beach house as the waves rolled steady against the shore. The grill sizzled, flames licking at the skewers while the scent of rosemary and garlic filled the night. My grandchildren darted between chairs with sparklers in their hands, squealing as their trails lit the twilight. I had owned this house for over 20 years, every shingle paid for with double shifts and careful saving after my husband passed. It had always been my pride, the place where family could come together. That night, I thought I was watching another memory take shape, until I heard the words. Jason, my daughter's husband, leaned back in his chair, beer in hand, his voice carrying above the music. Honestly, he chuckled to a cousin, she ruins the vibe. Always hovering. It's supposed to feel like our house, but with her here, it doesn't. In that moment, I felt smaller than the waves outside. The words struck harder than the salty wind. Ruins the vibe. Just like that, 2 decades of sacrifice were dismissed with a laugh. I froze, the tongs heavy in my hand, the hiss of meat on the grill suddenly loud in my ears. My daughter sat beside him, eyes darting quickly away, saying nothing. I forced myself to smile when the children ran to me for more sparklers. I lit their sticks, the sulfur smoke stinging my nose, masking the bitterness burning in my chest. Later that night, as I lay in the small upstairs bedroom, the ceiling fan clicking with every turn, the words replayed on a loop. Ruins the vibe. I thought of the mortgage statements I had paid alone, the weekends I spent painting the shutters, the holidays when I carried boxes of groceries up these very stairs. All of it condensed into a careless insult. The digital clock read 11:47 p.m., The waves outside pounded like a reminder, steady and unyielding. My daughter's laughter drifted faintly from downstairs, mingled with Jason's deeper voice. I turned toward the window, where the moonlight spilled silver across the sand, and asked myself the question that refused to fade. If I am only a burden here, why am I the one holding the keys? My hand brushed against the drawer of the nightstand, where the deed to the house rested in its folder. Paper that carried my name alone. Paper that meant I wasn't invisible, no matter how they tried to frame me. I didn't say a word at the dinner table that night, but in my silence, a seed had already taken root. The next morning, the house smelled faintly of sunscreen and sea salt, the remnants of a family week at the shore. I rose before anyone else, padding barefoot across the cool tile of the kitchen, the ocean breeze lifting the curtains. Outside, gulls screeched as they circled above the surf. I brewed coffee, its rich aroma cutting through the lingering smoke of last night's grill. With the mug warming my hands, I glanced at the photographs on the wall, frames I had chosen years ago. My husband smiling in his fishing hat, Jason and my daughter on their wedding day, the grandchildren as toddlers in matching swimsuits. This house had held our story for 2 decades, every corner filled with echoes of sacrifice. When my husband passed, I worked 3 jobs for nearly 7 years. I cleaned offices at dawn, answered phones at a doctor's office by day, and waited tables at night. Every paycheck went into one account. I skipped vacations, patched shoes instead of buying new ones, and sold my wedding ring to help with the down payment. The beach house wasn't luxury. It was survival turned into sanctuary. Even now, I can still feel the emptiness on my finger. So when Jason's words, ruins the vibe, drifted into my ears, they weren't just thoughtless. They cut into the very core of my sacrifice. Still, I told myself it was a slip. A red flag, yes, but maybe just frustration after a long week. I ignored the sting and focused on the children. Later that morning, 7-year-old Mia ran up with damp hair smelling of salt water. "Grandma, can you braid it like you used to braid Mommy's?" Her small hands tugged at mine, and I smiled despite the heaviness in my chest. "Of course," I said, gently weaving strands while the waves thundered outside. My daughter watched from the deck, phone in hand, pretending not to notice. Jason, meanwhile, strutted around like the host. He fetched drinks for cousins, clapped friends on the back, and dropped casual lines like, "This house is perfect for us." Exactly our vibe. Each time he said our, his eyes skipped over me as if I were air. I remembered another moment, months earlier before summer began. My daughter had called late at night, her voice tight. "Mom, Jason's been talking about maybe taking over the beach house one day. He thinks it should eventually be ours." I had laughed nervously, brushing it aside. "Sweetheart, the deed's in my name." "It's not up for debate," she'd sighed. "I know. Just don't overreact if he makes comments. Jason just thinks, eventually, the house will be ours." That was my flaw. Always minimizing, always choosing silence over conflict. At lunch, I carried trays of sandwiches to the deck. Emily, Jason's sister, looked up. "This place is amazing. You're lucky Jason's family gets to enjoy it so often." I opened my mouth, ready to say the truth, that I alone had bought it, kept it afloat. But Jason jumped in first. "Yeah, it really feels like ours now." The word stung, but I forced my lips into a polite smile. That evening, as the sun dropped crimson into the ocean, I joined my neighbor, Mrs. Lopez, at the fence. She had lived down the shore for 30 years, watching families rise and fall. She lowered her voice. "I heard your son-in-law telling folks at the cafe this is their house now. Be careful, Carita. He doesn't respect what's yours." I nodded, heart heavy, the salty wind whipping my hair. Inside, Jason turned up the music. My daughter clapped along, laughing with cousins. And me? I stood at the sink, rinsing dishes, water running hot over my hands, wondering how long I would keep pretending I didn't hear what was shouted right in front of me. 2 days later, the weekend crowd thinned. Relatives packed their coolers and folded chairs, leaving behind empty bottles clinking in recycling bins. The beach house felt quieter, though the walls seemed to hum with the words I couldn't shake. "Ruins the vibe." I rose early that Monday, padding down the hallway toward the study Jason liked to use when he worked remotely. The door stood ajar. On the desk, his tablet glowed with an email draft still open. Curiosity tugged at me. I stepped closer, the floor creaking under my weight. The words leapt from the screen. "Once the house transitions, it'll finally feel like ours." No more compromises. No more babysitting the old vibe. My breath caught. The cursor blinked at the end of the sentence, mocking me. My hand trembled as I snapped the cover shut. The floor creaked again, this time behind me. I spun, pulse hammering. Jason stood in the doorway, brow furrowed. "Everything okay?" he asked, voice casual but edged. I forced a smile, clutching the coffee mug I carried like a shield. "Just checking if the kids left their homework here." He studied me for a moment too long, then shrugged. "Don't stress, Mom." "You worry too much. We all know you mean well gaslighting wrapped in faux reassurance." His smile never reached his eyes. That afternoon, I found myself on the porch with my daughter. She scrolled through her phone, barely looking up. "Jason told me you've been tense," she murmured. "Maybe you're reading too much into things." I wanted to shout, to shake her into remembering who had built this house. Instead, I bit back the words. "I just want peace," I whispered. She patted my knee absently, eyes still on her screen. "Then don't overreact. You're making it bigger than it is that night." The ocean wind rattled the shutters as I tucked Mia into bed. She yawned, pulling her blanket to her chin. "Grandma," she said sleepily, "Mommy says you always mess with the vibe. But I like when you're here." Her words twisted in my chest. From Emily's lips to Jason's jokes to a child's bedtime whisper, the poison had seeped everywhere. I kissed her forehead, whispering, "I love you, sweetheart." Don't ever forget that. When I stepped back into the hall, the house felt unfamiliar, like a stage where I had become the unwanted extra. The scent of salt lingered, mingled with the faint tang of lemon cleaner. Downstairs, Jason laughed at the TV, his voice booming, filling walls that weren't his. I paused at the bottom of the stairs, staring at the framed deed tucked discreetly in the cabinet drawer. Paper with my name, proof of sacrifice, proof of ownership, proof that silence could become strategy. By midweek, the tension inside the beach house pressed down heavier than the storm clouds gathering over the ocean. The air smelled of salt and rain, the kind that makes old wood swell and windows groan in their frames. I told myself I couldn't keep living on overheard words and children's echoes. If I was going to act, I needed proof, solid, undeniable. It came in fragments. The first fragment arrived when the mailman slipped a thick envelope through the slot. I picked it up from the mat, noticing the return address of a realty firm in town. Curiosity prickled. I carried it to the kitchen, steam rising from the kettle as I opened it. Inside were glossy brochures, listings for beachfront homes, market trends and opportunities. Jason's name was scrawled in pen on the request line. My stomach tightened. He wasn't just talking. He was researching. The second fragment came 2 days later when I drove into town for groceries. On a whim, I stopped at the bank where Mr. Hughes, an old acquaintance, still managed accounts. His office smelled faintly of leather polish and peppermint candies. "Could we review the deed again?" I asked, my voice steady. He nodded, pulling a folder from the cabinet. "Still in your name, Mrs. Carter, sole owner, no liens. Solid as stone," but then he added, lowering his voice. "Funny thing. Your son-in-law came by last week asking about transfer procedures. Of course, I told him nothing without your consent, but it struck me as bold." The papers under my hand felt heavier than they should, the raised seal pressing into my fingertips. The third fragment revealed itself in the most dangerous way. One afternoon, while Jason and my daughter were at the beach with the kids, I found his laptop open on the dining table. My heart pounded as I scrolled quickly. In his drafts folder, an email gleamed like a dagger. "Once the house transitions, it'll finally be ours." "Mom won't even notice. We'll handle it discreetly," I gasped. And in that instant, my hand knocked over a glass of water. It spilled across the keyboard, the hiss of electronics filling the air. I scrambled for a towel, wiping furiously, pulse racing. The front door creaked. Footsteps sounded. Jason's voice called, "Everything okay?" I forced cheer into my tone. "Just spilled some water." Nothing major. He appeared in the doorway, eyes narrowing as they flicked to the damp towel, the laptop. Suspicion darkened his face. I smiled tightly, clutching the glass. Clumsy me. He lingered a beat too long before shrugging. "Right. Be careful." When he left, I exhaled shakily. My hands still trembled as I snapped photos of the email before shutting the laptop. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the evidence arrayed in my mind like cards. Realty brochures with his name, bank confirmation that he'd made inquiries, draft email promising my disappearance from the equation, an evidence chain. Fragile but undeniable. But instead of relief, grief welled up. I thought of the night my husband and I had driven to this very coast, eating sandwiches in the car as we dreamed of buying a place by the sea. I thought of the years I spent scrubbing office floors and counting tips to make that dream real. And now, to them, I was simply in the way. I pressed my palm against the folder holding the deed. My name stared back in black ink, firm and clear. For the first time, I understood. They weren't just careless. They were waiting, circling like gulls for me to vanish. But I wasn't vanishing. Not now, not ever. Thanksgiving weekend arrived. Though at the beach, the season meant gray skies and empty boardwalks instead of crowds. The house smelled of roasted turkey and sage, the oven humming as I basted quietly, listening to the wind batter the windows. Jason sat in the living room, his voice booming through a football game. My daughter flitted between kitchen and couch, glancing at me with practiced indifference. Dinner began, candles flickering against the gathering storm outside. The table groaned with dishes I had prepared, yet when Jason raised his glass, his words carried another sting. "Here's to family," he said, smirking faintly, "and to the future of our beach house traditions." The word "our" landed heavy. I saw a few relatives nod politely, assuming this was harmless, but my daughter's silence confirmed what I already knew. They had rehearsed this narrative. I lowered my fork, my appetite gone. For years I had absorbed these slights, brushing them away like sand on the porch. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. That silence kept the peace. But that night, as the storm howled and the walls rattled, a new thought took shape. For years, I thought silence meant weakness. But that night, I saw it differently. Silence wasn't weakness. Silence was strategy. When Jason bragged about our traditions, I caught my own reflection in the dining room mirror. An older woman, lines etched by decades of work, eyes dimmed by neglect. But behind those eyes, I saw something steadier, a spark I hadn't noticed in years. I remembered the banker's firm words, sole owner, solid as stone. I remembered the notary's seal beneath my fingertips, the deed that bore only my name, all those nights mopping floors, counting tips, driving home exhausted. None of it had been for Jason's narrative. It had been for me, for my children, for the dream my husband and I whispered over sandwiches in a parked car by the shore. For the first time, I no longer saw myself as the unwelcome guest in my own house. I saw myself as the keeper of the keys, the one holding the choice that defined everyone else's future. As conversation buzzed around the table, I smiled faintly, nodding at jokes I barely heard. Let them think I was retreating again. Let them mistake my quiet for surrender. In truth, I was already making plans. When the storm finally broke and the first snow of the season dusted the dunes, I stood at the window, coffee steaming in my hand. The house creaked, solid against the wind. My house, my sacrifice turned into stone and timber. If they thought I ruined their vibe, then perhaps it was time to remove myself from the picture, on my terms. Perhaps it was time to show them exactly whose name carried the weight here. The silence that once felt like invisibility now wrapped around me like armor. And I understood, finally, that I didn't need to shout to be heard. I only needed to act. December settled in with brittle winds and early sunsets. The beach boardwalk stood empty, storefronts shuttered for the season, while our house perched like a sentinel against the crashing tide. Inside, Jason's sudden cheerfulness struck me as suspicious. He offered to carry groceries, poured me coffee without being asked, even complimented the wreath I hung on the door. One evening, he lingered in the kitchen, leaning on the counter while I chopped carrots. "We should plan a big family summer here next year," he said, voice too smooth. "Invite everyone, make it ours." The word snagged like a thorn. I smiled faintly. "We'll see." It was a performance, his charm rehearsed, his patience feigned. And I knew. It wasn't reconciliation, it was strategy. At church that Sunday, Mrs. Lopez pulled me aside. Her breath smelled of peppermint as she whispered, "I overheard Jason telling someone at the cafe that soon the house will be theirs. He said you're just hanging on." The words sank heavy, though not surprising. I thanked her, pressing her hand. Back home, Jason and my daughter decorated the tree, laughter drifting into the kitchen. Jason strung lights carelessly, tangling the cords while my daughter scolded lightly. "You'll break them," she teased. To any outsider, they looked the perfect couple. But beneath it, tension coiled. That night, I sat with Mr. Hughes at the bank again. The old leather chair creaked under me as he reviewed documents. "Your authority remains absolute," he reassured. "But if you ever consider selling, the market is strong." He hesitated, then added, "Forgive me, but are you safe here?" "You seem pressed." His words lingered as I left, the wind whipping my coat against my legs. A week later, Jason made his boldest move yet. He handed me a glossy brochure for a new beach property down the coast. "We could upgrade," he said casually. "This place is dated. If you sold now, we could all benefit. Think of it as a family decision. Family decision." My hands tightened around the brochure. His smile was sweet, but his eyes were already measuring curtains. "I'll think about it," I murmured. False resolution took shape. He believed his performance was working. My daughter chimed in sweetly that night. "Mom, Jason just wants what's best. We can build new traditions together." I nodded, letting them believe. But inside, resolve hardened. The children sensed the cracks more than anyone. One afternoon, Mia whispered while we baked cookies, the smell of cinnamon filling the kitchen. "Grandma, Daddy says one day you won't live here anymore." "Is that true?" I pressed dough into shapes with trembling hands. "One day things might change," I told her gently. "But remember, this house was built with love. That never goes away." As Christmas drew near, relatives returned for another gathering. The house brimmed with laughter, cider steaming in mugs, pine needles scattered across the floor. Jason played the host, raising his glass, announcing plans for our beach summers. Cousins clapped, oblivious. I stood by the doorway, tray in hand, watching. To them, his charm worked. To me, it was theater, a script rehearsed too many times. And as I watched, the path crystallized. If they wanted the house to be theirs, I would make sure it was no one's, at least not theirs. The first week of July arrived with a blaze of heat, waves crashing against the shore as families poured into the coastal town for the holiday. Our beach house, weathered but proud, stood ready for another summer. Jason had insisted on organizing a grand 4th of July gathering. Cousins, in-laws, even co-workers invited. "Everyone loves this place," he boasted to my daughter as they unloaded coolers. "It's the heart of our family." I listened from the porch, the ocean breeze carrying the scent of sunscreen and charcoal. The irony nearly choked me. By then, the papers had already been signed, the sale complete, the keys resting in my purse. Inside, laughter and music swelled. Children ran barefoot across the sand, sparklers waiting for nightfall. Jason moved through the house like he owned it, slapping backs, pouring drinks. He turned up the stereo until the windows rattled, his voice booming. "This is our tradition!" At dinner, the long table glowed under string lights strung along the deck, plates piled with grilled corn and watermelon, glasses clinking. Jason rose, lifting his beer. "Here's to the beach house that brings us together. Our house, our vibe, our legacy." The crowd cheered. My daughter smiled beside him, pride in her eyes. I set down my fork, heart steady. The moment had come. "Actually," I said, rising slowly, my voice cutting through the chatter, "there's something everyone should know." She let the silence hang, the waves pounding like a drum roll outside. The deck quieted. Only the surf filled the pause. I reached into my purse and drew out the folder, the deed, the sale agreement, my name in bold, followed by the buyer's. I laid the papers flat on the table, the string lights glinting off their surface. "This house was never yours," I said, eyes fixed on Jason. "I built it, I paid for it, I carried it, and last month I sold it." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Jason blinked, face draining of color. You can't," he stammered, voice cracking. "This is our home, our summers. You ruined everything." "No," I replied evenly. "You ruined respect when you mocked me in my own home. You ruined family when you decided I was just in the way. The house is gone. The new owners will move in next week." A murmur spread. Relatives whispering, eyes darting. My daughter's face flushed crimson. "Mom, how could you?" she whispered, trembling. I turned to her gently. "Because silence doesn't mean surrender, and dignity doesn't mean being invisible." Jason slammed his fist on the table, rattling glasses. "You've embarrassed us in front of everyone." "Embarrassment," I said calmly, is realizing you never held the power you thought you did. From the edge of the table, Mrs. Lopez stepped forward, voice steady. She's telling the truth. I saw the realtor here last week. She handled it with grace, more grace than you deserved. Jason's mouth worked soundlessly, fury and humiliation colliding. I gathered the papers back into the folder, slipping them into my purse. Enjoy tonight, I said, lifting my chin. It will be your last summer memory here. The children stared wide-eyed, confused but silent. Fireworks boomed in the distance, the night sky exploding in color, just as the room fractured into chaos. Jason shouting, my daughter pleading, relatives murmuring in disbelief. I stepped away from the table, the surf roaring louder in my ears. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the unwanted guest in my own home. I felt like the architect of its ending, the keeper of its legacy. The beach house felt strangely hollow after that night, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the shock. Jason stormed out with his friends, leaving beer bottles half-finished and voices buzzing in the distance. My daughter stayed behind, her face pale, her words clipped and trembling. "How could you humiliate us like that?" she demanded. I met her gaze quietly. Humiliation isn't what I did. It's what he did every time he spoke as if I didn't matter. She flinched, but said nothing more. The following week, the transaction finalized. I walked through the house one last time with the realtor, the scent of fresh paint mingling with the salty air. Papers rustled in my hands as she handed me the final confirmation. "It's official," she said gently. "The sale is complete." The keys felt cold in my palm before I placed them into hers. The click of transfer sounded final yet freeing. Word traveled quickly. At church, whispers trailed after me like shadows. Some shook their heads in disapproval, but more leaned close to whisper encouragement. "You did the right thing," Mrs. Lopez assured me. "Respect is worth more than walls." "At the bank, mister." Hughes congratulated me. "Strong market. You sold at the right time, and you've protected yourself." He helped me set up new accounts, suggesting ways the proceeds could be used. We drafted the framework for a community scholarship fund, something in my husband's memory, something that would outlast gossip. This time, the ink of my signature didn't just end something, it began something new. The children struggled to understand. One afternoon, Mia tugged at my sleeve. "Grandma, where will we play next summer?" I knelt, smoothing her hair. "Wherever we are together, sweetheart." A house is just wood and nails. Family is the love inside it. Her small arms wrapped around my neck, and for the first time in weeks, my chest eased. Jason, meanwhile, spiraled. Relatives reported hearing him rant at gatherings. "She robbed us. She stole what was ours." But each time, someone corrected him. "It was never yours." Everyone knows whose name was on that deed. His anger only deepened his humiliation. My daughter grew quieter, caught between loyalty to her husband and the weight of truth. One evening, she came to me alone. "I don't agree with how you did it," she said, eyes rimmed red. "But I can't deny it was yours to do." It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall between us. In the weeks that followed, the beach community reacted too. Neighbors stopped me at the market, some curious, others supportive. "We all saw how he treated you," one said softly. "It's about time someone reminded him respect is earned, not claimed." I poured myself into the scholarship fund. Forms spread across my dining table, steam rising from a fresh cup of tea as I wrote out the mission statement. For children of single parents to honor sacrifice and perseverance. The act gave me peace. The house had been my dream with my husband, but its sale became something larger, a legacy for others who knew struggle. When the realtor mailed me a final letter with the closing statement, I traced my name and smiled. It was more than ink on paper. It was proof that silence, once used as a shield, had become my voice, By early spring, the ocean breeze carried a softer edge, the chill of winter lifting. I stood on a different porch now, one closer to town, smaller, but mine all the same. The waves still roared in the distance, steady as breath. But the house I once fought to protect was no longer part of me. Some days I missed it. The cedar shutters I painted myself, the wide deck where sparklers once danced in the night. But when memory stung, I reminded myself, walls can hold laughter, but they can also trap contempt. Letting go was not loss, it was release. One Sunday, Mia tugged my hand after church, her curls bouncing in the sunlight. "Grandma, Daddy says you ruined the vibe forever," she whispered, as if confessing a secret. I knelt, meeting her eyes. "Maybe I did," I said softly, "but sometimes ruining the wrong vibe makes space for the right one." She giggled, pressing her face into my shoulder, and I felt the sting of Jason's insult dull into something almost ironic, almost empowering. The scholarship fund launched that month. I attended the small ceremony, papers signed, checks prepared. The first recipients, 2 local high school students, thanked me with trembling voices, eyes shining. "This will change my life," one whispered. In their gratitude, I saw the echo of my husband's dream, the purpose he and I once held in that car by the shore. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, pen in hand, the tea cooling beside me. I thought of Jason's smug laughter, my daughter's silence, the long years of sacrifice. I thought of the words that once pierced me, ruins the vibe, and how they had become the spark for change. I wasn't just the babysitter, the housekeeper, the silent one in the corner. I was the builder, the protector, the one who chose when the story ended and how it would begin again. I wasn't just a guest. I was the one holding the keys all along. Life, I realized, is less about houses and more about what we carry forward. Dignity, legacy, love that outlasts stone and timber. As I closed my journal, I looked out the window where the moonlight stretched across the sea, and I wondered, what would others have done in my place? Would they have stayed silent, clinging to a false peace? Or would they have chosen, as I did, to let silence become action and reclaim their own story?